Welcome back to our series covering the development of our upcoming cozy train game, A Bumpy Ride. Last time, we covered the initial development and sent our first playtest out. The feedback we've gotten from that playtest has been incredibly helpful, and we've made immense progress since you last saw the project. Let's see how much we can cover.
One of the first things I wanted to fix was making it more obvious which track the player was switching onto, so we made that track glow. Also, there was no visual feedback for when the player slams on the brakes, which is important because it deducts points from a passenger's score, so we implemented this camera shaking effect.
I got working on some scenery props, starting with the train station. Continuing with the Disney-esque inspiration for the art, I decided to base the station on the various Frontierland stations found in Disney parks around the globe. I feel like these stations have a certain timeless charm and are a perfect fit for the era that we're shooting for. I also made some new track pieces so that we could set up a preset track kit for the game. Once those are both finished, I spent some time working on a grass texture. Looking to Animal Crossing for inspiration, I made a pattern out of primitive shapes and cute little bushes.
Next, I have been tasked to make a simple dialogue system, which is specifically for the tutorial of the game. After that was implemented, I started working on figuring out how the passengers are going to work in the world. So I made a quick little duck dude to be the representation of the passengers, and I learned about nav meshes for having them walk around the station platform. Now that they're walking around, they also spawn in a ticket on the side of the screen to show you their destination. Of course, we needed to add monetary incentives to delivering passengers, so I made a payment system based on how well the passengers thought you drove the train. Lastly, I worked on adding this basic map.
After I finished some quick concept art, I needed to choose a 3D modeling program. I had previously learned Autodesk Maya, but I didn't have access to it, so I picked up Blender. Every new program can be a little overwhelming at first, but it was easy to learn how to create simple, low-poly characters from just a few tutorials. The only real problem arose when I unfortunately based the scale of my character models on an older world scale. I had completely missed the memo that the world scale of our game had been changed and my models, which were rigged and animated already, were much too small. I was able to rescale everything, but it caused a lot of hiccups that could have been avoided if I had tested one of the models in Engine first. Always test your models, rigging, and animation, please. While it can be discouraging to have to redo things, in the end it made me feel much more confident in the program.
The next art task that we needed to tackle was the new UI. The original UI was definitely UI, but I wanted it to look like actual train controls. The throttle controls on the right are actually based on a part of a train's controls called a reverser, and the speed gauge is sort of based on the steam pressure gauges found in the train's cab as well. The new switch UI is also based on a real railroad switch stand, just simplified with some arrows to help players understand which way they're going.
After importing the correctly scaled models, the next task was setting up animations. Josh created a blueprint passenger chart so I could apply and test my animations in Engine. Seeing the little characters I made moving around in our world made all the extra work worth it. The first passengers I modeled were unique characters based on animals we liked, childhood stuffed animals, and beloved pets. That handful of characters walking in the world made it feel alive, but I wanted the world to feel like a non-repetitive, bustling train route. These people are busy and have places to go. It was a team effort to edit the blueprints and figure out masking layers and color palettes to allow for randomization. With the fancy setup in place, I started making generic characters. Each generic passenger animal gets 2 outfits, materials, and sets of masks for separating details that will be randomized with different colors. It's a lot to remember for each time I make a new model, but the sheer amount of cute color combinations waiting in game is a wonderful motivator.
It was at this point that we started working on a whole bunch of new aesthetic additions. This is really where the game started to feel like an actual thing. We added a daylight cycle, which the entire train, as well as buildings in the world, react to. This immediately made the world feel so much more grounded, and I truly love how the train looks just rolling through the night.
One thing that wasn't ideal about the passengers was that they instantly disappeared when they hopped on the train. I worked with Nathaniel to implement a dithering transition so that they fade out of existence instead. My next big task was to connect several pieces of our game together, starting with this cute little home screen that I made.
One fun part of the new UI updates I was working on at the time were the new tickets. These tickets show the destination, arrival time, and class of the passenger. The material uses a packed texture, where masks are packed into the individual channels of the image, R, G, and B, so that we can save some texture space. Using these masks, we can dynamically recolor the tickets at runtime based on the specific passengers you're picking up.
Now it was time to get my hands dirty and learn a brand new concept: saving and loading player data. After a bit of research, it didn't seem too complex, just very mundane, having to save and load each individual variable one at a time. But now that it's in the game, I've added a way to keep track of how many in-game days have been played, as well as an end-of-day screen showing the day's statistics.
Now, this is where this devlog would have originally ended, but we feel like you all really deserve to get the full update so that you can really see where the game is right now. Much of what you've seen so far has actually been achieved months ago and isn't very current. Let's keep going. The next major hurdle we had faced was the second playtest. This was the first time the game was shown in any real capacity to a larger group of people, and we had more additions to fit in before we could get to that.
My biggest focus before sending out the second playtest was making a simple shop that people could use to buy upgrades for their train. We thought of 3 sections for the shop: skins, upgrades, and staff members.
We sat down and brainstormed a list of upgrades and created a very rough UI as placeholders for the shop menu. At this point, we were feeling out what would be good for the game and focused on 2 upgrades only. One that increased passenger capacity, and one that introduced first-class passengers. The skins were something I had planned from the very beginning. The train is effectively our game's main character, like I've said before, so I didn't want the actual structure of it to change much at all, but I did want to give players a chance to express themselves with fun paint jobs. In this first iteration of the skin system, all that was changed was the locomotive's textures.
We wanted to have staff you could hire for your train that would give unique boosts to the day's gameplay. I wanted each staff member to impact a different aspect of the gameplay, with the first of those being time related. The early bird staff member gives the player extra time in the morning, allowing for a slightly longer day. Next, I wanted the train to go faster, so we implemented the fireman. The fireman's effect boosts the speed of the train, which feels great. The bartender was next. I thought it'd be fun to have a staff member that boosted the passengers' moods. And what better way than with food and drink? Finally, I added the conductor, who gives passengers a chance to upgrade to a first-class ticket once they board, paying more money upon arrival to their destination.
Once we finished all of that, we made the Google form for distributing the playtest and sent it out. Once again, the feedback we got was incredibly helpful. People were responding super positively to the game, and we felt like we had something great in the works. One individual even spent 52 in-game days playing, which is an insane amount of time. There was also a lot of pretty valid criticism, and we tried to take as much of it into account as possible. Unfortunately, you can't please everyone, and for almost every criticism, there was another tester praising the feature that the criticizer disliked. That said, we moved forward in stride and tried to find happy mediums to satisfy what people were asking for. Up until this point, the game had only one station type. You saw me design it earlier, a cute little yellow and brown depot. I wanted to see if I could reskin this model into a few different depots, so that every region could have a specific station style. I threw together some textures for a few variants, and I think they turned out super cute. 2 of the features that a lot of folks were requesting were more train car types to add to your train, and some sort of permanent upgrades for the train as well. We decided to take those 2 ideas and mash them together, adding a gondola car for freight service and a caboose for extra staff. We also made the first class car upgrade a bit more obvious, and so a fully upgraded train really feels filled out now. To go with these additions, I also figured out different ticket paper colors based on the region that the passenger is destined for. With the station name, color tab, and paper color, our hope is that the player will be able to figure out where they need to go should they not know off the top of their head which way to start heading.
I wanted to bring life to the landscape with grass and trees to make each biome special. The grass was made out of simple planes, and the brunt of the visual workings are in the blueprints. The grass planes worked seamlessly, but the 3D tree models posed a new problem. Like the grass, the trees sway to make the scenery look more lively, but that kind of visual effect absolutely tanks the frame rate on lower-end machines. I tried to understand how other games made their trees move, only to realize that many games' trees are actually static, and I had just never noticed before we reached this problem. I tried to adjust the number of polys per tree and remove swaying in the hopes that it might improve the frame rate, but Unreal wasn't having it, and we had to scrap those trees altogether. Switching gears, Nathaniel suggested we try billboard trees, which would be made of planes like the well-performing grass. I was disappointed to have to scrap the 3D trees because they had fit perfectly with the aesthetic we were going for, but billboard trees allowed for a wonderful amount of customization. I was able to put my digital painting skills to use and create custom brushes and color palettes for each tree type. It's always unfortunate to lose work, but it's worthwhile to look for solutions that are aesthetically pleasing while also improving optimization.
My next big project was to create a freight delivery system that had to feel different than the passenger gameplay. I wanted the freight to be more difficult, but more rewarding than delivering the passengers. The key difference between them is that there's a penalty for not completing a freight job by the end of the day, which then the player has to pay. I designed a freight contract system, which allows the player to either accept or decline a freight job at any freight house. I worked with Nathaniel to design the freight house and the animated crane that loads and unloads the train, which turned out really cute. Some of the other features I worked on, which I won't go into too much detail about, are the settings menus, a leveling up system, and pedestrians that you can hit with your train, but definitely shouldn't.
With Josh building the freight system, I had to design some actual freight to carry. We landed on 6 different freight types: fruits, honey, ice blocks, dynamite, hay bales, and cheese. I drew up some little sketches of how I wanted these models to look before I got to designing them in 3D. I absolutely adore how they all turned out, and I think they're some of the cutest assets I've made for this game yet. Around this time, we also went ahead and revamped the main menu and shop scenes. I think these new menus better reflect the feeling that we want players to feel when they first get started in this game, and they really set up the cozy railroading vibes almost immediately.
It can be difficult to know how each passenger is faring on the train since the player can't see them, so I made emotes as a visual representation. Sometimes I make them angry on purpose just to see the little silly face I drew.
Flames on the side of my face.
Josh brought up a great idea to also have the passengers be able to blink, so they look more alive. I had to adjust all the materials I made previously, but it wasn't a difficult transition and was a very cute improvement. Having such a small team can be difficult, but it's great to communicate and share ideas quickly between assigned jobs.
There was one task that we were actually sort of avoiding, and that was sitting down together and designing the actual game world. Up to now, the game had a few nebulous map ideas, but nothing really concrete. We had at one point considered multiple separate maps linked by sort of transition sections, where you'd get a loading screen in between them, but decided ultimately that one large map was the way to go. After some deliberation, this is the very first layout that we landed on.
The track routes shown here are early passes on the routes, and they've evolved quite a bit since we drew this.
I think this is a good place to wrap up the devlog, for real this time. No sneak peeks this time around, as this one's run a bit long. If you happen to have enjoyed watching our progress, we'd appreciate it greatly if you could go and wishlist a Bumpy Ride on Steam, link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.